Welcome to another episode of the SCEA movement, where we get to have conversations with educators across this state. And so we're going to jump right on in. Todd, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. As we mentioned before we started recording, just very, very busy time, I think, for everybody at the SCEA as we go and visit with these new employees and at orientations. And there's all kinds of meetings and things of people gearing up for the school year. But really good work, exciting work. We've welcomed over 600 new members this summer, and just exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely been a busy time. This week alone, I stopped by Hartsville, South Carolina at Coker University. And then in that same week, I was in Beaufort, South Carolina, welcoming those educators. And tomorrow I'll be here in Columbia doing something. So it's been busy. And for those who are listening or watching, make sure you tap into our Facebook page, the SCEA. We'll have a back to school Facebook Live on August 14th at 7 p.m. that I'm going to make sure that you guys tap into and you take a look at. So absolutely.
Yeah, we love for our members to have voice. And I was at the summer leadership conference that you organized, and it was an awesome event. And I remember Mary Rita Watson at one point was like, you should really talk to this guy named Will McCorkle. You should have him on your podcast. And so we reached out to Will, and Will agreed to come on. And so we're going to go ahead, without further ado, bring on Will McCorkle. Will, what's up? What are you up to?
Well, today I'm doing a little bit of moving. So it's been right before the school year starts back. We're actually taking some teacher leaders, some students up to DC on Sunday. And we're going to meet with the NEA up there. So I made sure to kind of get that into the schedule. We're meeting with the Department of Ed and West Ed, but I was like, we need to meet with the NEA while we're up there. Just to give you a little background about myself, I was a former middle school and high school teacher. I taught both in the Greenville area and in Costa Rica. So kind of two different areas there. My last job was at Greenville High School. I taught social studies, and then I got my doctorate degree in 2018 from Clemson, and then I came down to College of Charleston. So I'm starting my 5th year at College of Charleston. I teach social studies methods and also the educational foundations. I'm also the program director for a program we have called the Masters of Teaching, Learning, and Advocacy. So it fits in very well with the mission of the SCEA. I always bring in Albert or other people that would be very much in line with these goals of the SCEA. So we'll bring in school board members or people who are running for school board. We'll bring in different advocates. And so I always push the SCEA and tell students how important it is as they're going into teaching that they're, joining this organization and fighting for change and advocating for their own profession.
Perfect. And we appreciate the invitations and the opportunities. I actually was with College of Charleston yesterday, virtually, because I had another meeting here in Columbia, and I had an opportunity to work with some of your colleagues and some of the folks that you have impacted. And you talked a lot kind of in your introduction about advocacy. Kind of what does that work look like for you in your classroom with your aspiring educators? I will be interested to look at what, advocacy is such a large umbrella. What are some things that are like passionate to you and the things that you work directly with?
Well, I think if we go on the individual classroom level, a lot of students, especially going into social studies, are a little scared right now. They're a little reticent in the current environment where you've got Moms for Liberty and all these groups that are, just looking to nitpick a lesson and looking for something to get a teacher in trouble. I always, tell them that's why it's so deeply important that you are part of an organization, whether, depending on, who you're talking to, if we want to call it a union or not. It's important to be part of a union, that you have some type of protection if some parent does go after you. And I feel like teaching in the social studies environment, that if you're actually going to be trying to advocate for social change, or even trying to advocate for your students, you might face some of that pushback. And so it's deeply important that you have that support if you ever do run into trouble. And so I think on that individual classroom level, getting students to understand that even though they're in an environment where oftentimes there's pushback against any type of advocacy, that it's important to push forward wisely, not going in just full guns a-blazing. And, you have to be wise in how you're doing this, but at the same time, not being so scared because of the political environment that you don't push for or work for social justice, even in your classroom. And then I think, on the community level, the district level, the state level, making students aware of what's going on in the state. And, I don't need to tell you all, or probably most of the people listening to this podcast, but this next election, as the way I put it, it's not just that a different form of public education is on the ballot. It's like the very idea of public education is on the ballot. And so I think with this push towards privatization, it's really ramped up now, and it's not even hidden so much the agenda. There's pressing forward. And so if educators are not engaged, if they don't go out and vote for Lisa Ellis, they just vote whatever their political line is, we might find education in South Carolina in a place where it's really irreparable. We've got a lot of issues right now, but I don't think there's often a realization of, if this privatization scheme goes all the way through, that the whole system's going to basically be deconstructed.
Yeah. I agree with you totally. In fact, we had at that event that Albert put together, we had Dr. J.R. Green from Fairfield County, he's the superintendent there. He was talking about this he sort of detailed the plan to deconstruct public education, which is to try to get vouchers passed first. And you pass the vouchers and you essentially destroy the public schools, and then eventually you eliminate the vouchers. It's like this whole process of, just slowly but surely destroying public education. And one of the ways I think they're going about doing that, by convincing the public that public educators are the enemy, that they're indoctrinating their kids, or they're grooming their kids. So if the public can start to see teachers as the enemy, it's much easier then for this plan to be successful. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is they'll take an extreme example. Like, there's always an example you can point to. So they'll find some story on Breitbart that maybe it was actually a teacher that did do something that was too far inappropriate. And then they just apply this is what teachers are doing across the board.
Right.
And I'm sure there's some teachers in some places that maybe take things too far to the left, right? Maybe that's the conversation we'd be having if we're in Portland right now. In South Carolina, I don't think that's the issue we're running into. It's not that we've got these leftist indoctrinating teachers in the classroom. It's really teachers that they realize that in South Carolina, without those protections, they're not going in there and just doing whatever they want or just doing crazy things. But I think a lot of it is not even, I think there's some people that might have a legitimate concern about what the teachers are saying in their classrooms, but I think those who are pushing it are doing it in a very cynical way.
Yes.
They don't believe in public education, and they probably know that this is not the issue they're making it out to be, but it's this red meat they can give their, the people that are listening to them to say, let's just get rid of public education. And one thing that does concern me, and I've just talking to some random people this week, um, I feel like post COVID, there's been this real push towards homeschooling. And I don't know if part of that's convenience where like, oh, I don't want to have to get my kid at school at 7:15. Part of it might be this ideological issue. Um, but the more and more people that just say, we're not going to be part of the system, I think it gets a lot easier just to abandon public education once you start getting 10-20% of parents that are homeschooling.
Mhm.
And I don't know how you stop that with the policies we have in place. I know in some countries like Germany is just like, you're not allowed to homeschool your children. Um, that would be ideal in my world, but I know that's not where we're at. But I think maybe changing that narrative about public education and even the merits of children and being in school in a physical environment with other children. Um, in this post-COVID world, it's often been this idea of, well, if they're getting the material online and they can do it, then why do they need to be in the school?
Right.
And really pushing back on that. And I think that's just going to be something that's increasingly difficult because of everything that happened during COVID.
That makes sense. And so for those of you all who are listening, and you want to check out kind of ways to vote, kind of what some of the responses that some of our candidates have kind of put out, to make sure that you visit the scea.org/votes, plural, at the scea.org/VOTES, and it'll give you some information about like how to vote, things of that nature, and kind of give you some support there, just so you have that clarification and clarity as well. One of the things that I know, Will, that's important to you, and one of the things that I've seen kind of interacting with you through the years, is really combating xenophobia and really doing some work through immigration and asylum seekers and refugees and things. And that's kind of your land and your space. I know you spent a lot of summers, not in South Carolina, doing that work, which is also important. I would love to hear a little bit kind of more about, that, maybe some success stories, maybe some of the things that you saw that is impactful and empowering, that South Carolina needs to consider and be aware of. We'd love to dive deeper into that area of your expertise as well.
Well, yeah, I've been involved. There's a Christian nonprofit called Practice Mercy that I'm on the board of. And we take groups down there. So some are from churches, some are from non-religious groups, from schools or universities, and bringing them down to see what's actually happening at the border. Last time we did an eyeglass clinic as well. So like actually making eyeglasses for asylum seekers. And it's one of these situations where some things have changed in the new administration. Some things have remained the same. There is a greater chance of people being able to get asylum, but at the same time, there's thousands of people just waiting on the Mexican side of the border just for the chance to even go through the asylum process. And so I try to really bring this into my classes as well, with my students, to understand what's going on in the immigration system. And as you were mentioning, pushing back against some of the xenophobia, which unfortunately, in some ways, is in the same category for me as the anti-critical race theory language. It's just used to provoke fear, and people that are thousands of miles from the border, they see a couple thousand people trying to enter, which would have been an hour at Ellis Island, 100 years ago. And there's this fear of everything's out of control. And so really changing that narrative, realizing these are people that are just trying to, in some cases, actually live, right? They're escaping this violence, which could cost their very lives, or just trying to have a little better life from where they're coming from.
Wow.
And I think in South Carolina, it's important for teachers because they're going to be getting some of these students in their classrooms, especially this next year. And there has been a little bit of a shift from Trump to Biden. So there probably will see a few more of these asylum seekers than they might have a year or two ago. I would just add in one thing in South Carolina. I would argue we're the most restrictive state in the nation for immigrant students. I think most people realize we're probably not on the leading edge of assisting immigrant students, but we're one of 3 states that completely bans undocumented students from studying in state colleges and universities. We were the first to do it. Governor Sanford signed that into law. Then Alabama did it, and Georgia has it in some of their public systems. If you're a Dreamer or a DACA recipient, you can't get in-state tuition. You can't get state licensure. And the thing that really shocks people when I tell them that this is that it's actually still practiced sometimes, or still the policy, that if you're a U.S. citizen but your parents are undocumented, that you're denied in-state tuition. Now, there was a lawsuit with the Southern Poverty Law Center that they pushed back on some of this. And so a lot of times students can get in-state tuition if they're in that situation, if they know the right person to talk to and they appeal the case. But South Carolina set up this system that makes it very difficult for immigrant students that are in a situation like they're undocumented, or even maybe they have DACA, but they're not allowed to pursue higher education or certain careers. And so that's one thing I've looked at. Even with, there's been some cases of people that were able to get a degree in education. They're bilingual. They want to teach in South Carolina, and the state's like, no, we're not going to give you licensure. And so they go to another state that will actually let them teach. And so I think there's a lot of work to do in this state. And a lot of it is teachers going out there, becoming politically engaged. One thing I would just add as well is, even if some of, teachers vote one political party, maybe the superintendent race, you could, maybe you're going to vote for your Republican representatives in these races, but if you're a teacher and you care about public education, then maybe consider voting for the Democratic candidate, at least in this race for this year. Maybe in other years, the differences between the candidates are not so vast. I think this year, I think we can all see there's a pretty vast difference between the candidates, and it could really determine what South Carolina's public education system looks like going forward.
So as we get ready to enter into a new school year, Will, and all of the things that may be on educators' mind, what are some advice, some encouragement, something that as they get ready, because some are already back actually. So as they are entering or have entered, what are some things that you can say to them that would kind of show them some light, show them some things, and really what should they lean into as they enter into the 2022-2023, which feels weird to say, school year?
Yeah, I think part of it is just realizing that your work and your effort really does make a difference. You might not see it that year, but I do, seeing college students now, even from when I first started teaching back in 2007, I do think this new generation coming up, there's a lot of real potential. And I think part of that is that the educators that they have had investing in them. So we hear a lot about Gen Z, and there's a lot of there's there's definitely issues with that generation, like every generation. But I think there's also often a real sense of kindness and compassion and a hope for justice. And so I think sometimes as a teacher, you don't see that the year you're teaching the student. It's, 4 years later, a student reaches out to you. I remember my first year teaching, I just had this student that was just a nightmare, right? That made as a 22-year-old, made my life difficult. And him reaching out, 4 or 5 years later and be like, you know what, I'm sorry I acted bad in your class, but I really learned a lot. And so I think keeping that in mind as you're going into the classroom, and then, always finding that community as well. I know it's difficult depending on the school that you're in. Sometimes schools don't actually facilitate that as much, but trying to get to know your fellow teachers, trying to build that sense of community, and hopefully, not just in your school, but in the broader educational community, which is why putting a plug to groups like the SCEA, why it's important to be reaching out to other teachers. Because when we're just fighting a battle in our individual classroom or with our individual situation, sometimes it can seem like there's no way out. But when you realize these are some structural issues that are at play, and you might not be able to change everything, but at least if you know that there's a path towards that change and it's not hopeless, I think it gives a different outlook. Because what you do in the classroom is deeply important, but if you don't also have one foot outside and seeing how you can make the system change, then a lot of times you're just going to be beating your head against the wall. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is a lot of times people just leave at that point because they feel like there's no way out.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so many great ideas and thoughts with us today. And we're so appreciative of the ally that you are for the SCEA, but more importantly for public schools and public educators. The work that you're doing to prepare the future educators is such an important piece of strengthening public schools so that our kids are going out there and having access to highly qualified, highly effective educators. And so thank you so much for what you do. And it's really good to finally put a face with a name. I've heard your name so much, so many people, so many times. Have you ever heard of Will McCorkle? And I'm like, we really need to get him on the podcast. So thank you for taking time today to come on and be a part of the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and hopefully see both of y'all in Charleston soon. Albert, we'll have to talk soon about getting some of the SCEA events. I'll talk to Alyssa, and we'll get that going soon.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
Okay. Well, thank y'all.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's Will McCorkle, and you have been watching or listening to the SCEA's Movement podcast. You can learn more about the SCEA at the scea.org, and we would love to have you as a part of our movement. If you'd like to join the SCEA, you can go to jointhescea.org. We wish everybody a wonderful start to the school year. We hope you have a great year. And if there's any way that we can support you this year, please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone at the SCEA, because we're here to support public educators so we can build the kind of schools you deserve and your students deserve. Albert, any final words?
No, thank y'all so much. Have a great start to the school year, and I hope to see y'all soon.
All right. Have a great one, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode.
See y'all.